All right, and thank you for tuning in another episode of Then We Win. My name is Dr. Justin Singleton, and I have a special guest with us here today. But most importantly, we have our co-host Kobi Jones, who's here with us, and we're going to have a very lighthearted conversation, very powerful. We have a very modest person on the phone line, well, not on the phone line, on the line with us. I'm going to call her future Dr. Robinson because I do believe that once you're in school, there's no turning back, especially once you meet me. So we're going to push on through in any way capacity. However, but future Dr. Robinson is here with us this evening. She's a PhD student in sports administration at the Georgia State University in Atlanta. I don't know why she's there. We talked about why she's there, but I still can't believe it because she actually played 3 years at volleyball at Michigan State. And then she went on back to the University of Hawaii, which she probably should have stayed there because it's a very beautiful state. But anyway, that's another story for another day. For future Dr. Robinson, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And before I dig right in, do you want to share anything about yourself that I may have missed about you or anything like that at all?
Well, first, I'll thank you both for having me. Yeah, it does seem crazy to move from Paradise to Atlanta, Georgia, but honestly, since being here in August, I am so glad that I made the decision to come. I'm at Georgia State for that reason to get my PhD and to work really closely with the wonderful Dr. Lauren Beasley. So, yeah, Hawaii, I'll see you again, but for now, we're going to be in Atlanta, just hanging out, finishing this program. So I like the sound of future Dr. Robinson. It's very encouraging to know that there's
Yeah.
light at the end of the tunnel here.
Look, I understand, like, once you're in school, you need somebody to encourage you and remind you of who you are and why you're here. Because in my mind, I dropped out of my doctoral program about 4 or 5 times. Like, I dropped out all the way. But, I had a nice cohort, had some colleagues, and so they're very inspiring. Singing and hearing future doctor, I believe in the power of words, and you're a future doctor. And we're going to leave it at that.
Thank you.
But thank you for joining us here. And, being that you're an athlete yourself, I just want to know, like, why in the world did you decide to get in social work and sports social work within itself? Because apparently you're going under the great tutelage of, and so we want to know, like, what is your why? Like, why are you here in this
Yeah,
space?
is a great question. My why probably starts back from the time that I was in high school. I grew up playing a bunch of different sports. Like my parents were firm believers in multi-sport athletes. In high school, I played volleyball, basketball, softball. I even played soccer for a year. I ran track. Like that was sports were my entire life. But I always knew I wanted to take volleyball to the next level. But I went to a smaller high school and playing all those sports, like getting recruited and that journey. I didn't have very many offers, and so it was just seriously. I don't know how I ended up at Michigan State, like I do, but I had walked on there. And at that time, I thought I went into that program or went into college thinking I wanted to do like exercise science. My mom's a physical therapist. So I was like, oh, I'll just go and do physical therapy. First semester, I took intro to kinesiology, which is you're learning like the anatomy and the physiology and all the things. And I was like, this is not for me. It was way too much math, way too much science. I was just like, I think I'm very social, I want to understand, family dynamics, how the human mind works. So I switched to psychology. And then I got to that and I was like, I feel like this is not really hitting it on the nose. And so I ended up being human development and family studies is what I got my undergrad degree in. And that I loved. I loved family systems theory. I loved understanding the dynamics of a family, how the individual is like situated in a family. And so when I was done playing volleyball at Michigan State, I knew that I had, because of COVID and because I redshirted a year, I had 2 more years of eligibility left to play. But I had always wanted to play volleyball at the University of Hawaii, and it worked out that when I entered the portal, they were looking for somebody in my position. So I knew I was going to transfer out there, but I had 2 more years. And so my aunt was like, hey, I think you should consider doing your MSW, your Master's of Social Work. And I was like, what's social work? I was like, I don't even know what that is. And she's like, she's a social worker herself. And so she was like, just apply to the program. Like, I think you'll really enjoy it. So I go there not really knowing what social work is, and then the first semester of my master's program, I loved it. I took I think like a marriage and family therapy course. I took a person and environment course, and it felt like everything just clicked and made sense. And so I was finishing up my volleyball career, also doing my MSW, and then the final year of my MSW, we I had a friend who we were friends in middle school and he moved away, but he was like, just messaged me out the blue and was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of the Alliance of Social Workers in Sport?" He was like, "I think that this is something you'd be really interested in, you being an athlete and all the things." And I was like, "Okay, cool." So that was the first time I had heard of ASWIS. And
Mhm,
going into my specialist year practicum, I actually had an advisor who was doing it was the first time they had practicum students it's called Rainbow Wellness, and it's the mental health services for student athletes at the University of Hawaii, and she is
mm.
at LCSW, so it worked out that they were doing the first year of practicum students, and that was when I was really like, "Wow, I can take this degree in social work and actually apply it in sport." For my whole journey of being an athlete, from my own mental health struggles, like I said, I was injured one year and that I had to redshirt, and the only person that they had available was, like, a sports psych who was more performance-based, and so I had just seen these gaps going through, and then all of my other teammates who were also struggling with mental health and all the things. And so, yeah, that final year of my specialist program, when I had an LCSW as my advisor, and she was already doing the work in sport, was when I really was kind of the catalyst to me pursuing this route as a sports social worker, but also now kind of formulating my research interests in mental health and sport, even from a sport administration program. So that was kind of a long-winded answer to it was partially just because I went through it myself as an athlete and it's a really
Mhm.
turbulent time, like especially the Division 1 level with the pressures and being a student and all of that. But then also, I had some people in my corner who were just encouraging me along the way, like, "Hey, I think you would be good at this. I think that this is something that, you can use your experience as an athlete. This could be a field that could really benefit from that."
How important was it for you to have a social worker on your side as an athlete? Because we are still in a space where you may find some of the larger schools are investing in sports social workers, but we know everybody is not a D1 athlete. You have a lot more people on D2 or in JUCO. And so, but they don't have that support. And so, why do you feel like it's important and why do you may think that's a good investment for even smaller schools to even, part invest in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. Having shout out to Kelly, her name's Kelly, and she is the head, therapist at for that Rainbow Wellness program, but something that I realized was, I feel like usually when you're an intern, like, say, in another program and you go in and you have, like, these tasks and you have these jobs that you have to do as an intern, they're already kinda set up. But with
Mhm.
Kelly as a social worker, she just was so open to us. She's like, social workers don't get boxed in. We could do a lot. So she was like, whatever experience you want to get in this, we can make it that. And so I think that mindset of her allowing us to come in, having some guidelines of course, we got some clinical experience, we got some administrative experience, we got a lot of different experiences, but she allowed us to have that flexibility because she knew we weren't getting paid. So she was like, you need to get as much experience as you can,
Mhm.
take this on into whatever you guys decide to do next. And so I think her perspective just as a social worker that, she knows that we wear many hats. She's gone from all the different fields and working with the houseless community and like all these different things that she got to do. She brought that experience into the sports space, and that nuance I feel like is so, so, so important. And so, yeah, I am definitely an advocate of any program, especially if you're talking about mental health, even if you're not, even if you're just talking about case management, even if you're just talking about, that area of social work, all sports programs can benefit from having a social worker on staff or somebody with social work experience. So I definitely think it was invaluable to where I am now and where I'm going to go in my career.
You touched a very important topic. We talk about case management. I think that is a big need for our athletes nowadays because sometimes that's what they really like. Okay, what's around, what's available for them, and I just need, something. And it may not always be from a therapeutic standpoint. It's like, okay, they definitely go through it, but they know what's available for them and what type of support they do need. So we could talk about that all day long, and I'm not going to because we'll be here all night. But you have a special interest at your research. I know that just starting your PhD journey. Congratulations on that. You just finished your first semester. And so you still have your hair and you're not going crazy
Yeah.
just yet. So that's always good. So congratulations on completing your first year.
Thank,
But
thank
then
you.
also, I know you started talking about you're wanting, well, you focus on the school, well, you attended Georgia State because of your research interests. And I know you say you have a special interest in spirituality and religion and sports. And so you don't hear that often, those two or three words put together in one sentence. And so I would love to hear more about, the who, what, when, where, and whys of like why this research is important to you. Because I guarantee you might be putting something out there that a lot of people are like, oh, Who knew? I didn't never thought about that. So if you could share more about that and your research interests, that'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. And I heard in so yes, you like you just said, I'm only in my first semester, so guys,
Yeah.
I'm in this thing out.
Hmm.
I did hear from one of my professors, and I thought that this was awesome because I think when we think about research, like usually, or at least when I got into the program, when I was thinking about research, you think about this like cut and dry, like you think about this quantitative, oriented formula of like how to do research. But she said something along the lines of like every study has an autobiography behind it. Like every study is a story and it means
Hmm.
something to somebody, or they wouldn't be putting this research out there. And so I think honestly, when I heard that, it kind of freed me up to think more creatively about, especially as a social worker, like how all the things that I've learned, how can I bring in novel research that is going to have a real impact on the lives of, for me right now, my focus is on athletes and especially collegiate athletics, like I said, because that was my experience and I saw those gaps. And so I like that you touched a little bit on like the case management point because I think what is missing is that holistic perspective. Is like, yes, the athlete is, their performance matters and like that's what all schools care about is the performance. But at the end of the day, they're these college students just figuring it out, just like everybody else. They just
Hmm.
happen to be able to dribble a ball good. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's really what it is. And so I think the holistic perspective is something that, especially throughout my master's program, is something that really stood out to me. And so for me, what I've heard all throughout the social work program is holistic is your physical health, yes, but also your emotional, your mental, and your spiritual well being. And so I think that especially that fourth tenet of the spiritual well being has been something that even in my own personal life and through my own journey as an athlete was something that really, really kept me grounded. And I think when I brought this up to Dr. Beasley, she was all for this idea because you don't hear a lot of research on that.
Hmm.
And so she brought up specifically kind of like sport chaplaincy. That's an area that social workers are kind of, putting their feet in the water a little bit right now is like, how do our sport chaplains a resource for athletes and how can they contribute to holistic well-being? And so that could be one direction. And or you could talk about like religion and spirituality as a protective factor or a risk or even a risk factor. Like how many of these athletes come in and their spirituality and their faith is already a protective factor for them, or how many athletes come in and they actually have had some church trauma or some religious trauma that they're working through at the same time as playing their sport. So I think right now it's a super you guys are hearing this as kind of
Yeah.
at the birth of the ideas, but I do think that there's something to be said there about that holistic well-being that social workers are really, really known for and can be a resource for athletes, especially.
Yeah, 'cause I was just thinking about like, how, especially, us being in the quote unquote Bible Belt down here, how religion and spirituality has a very important part of someone's livelihood. And then we all know when you go to college, like your eyes are just wide open. You do it to so many new experiences. I'm from a rural town. And so for me going to college, I'm like, whoa, like this is a big culture shock. And so then you think about, oh, I've been spiritually grounded for so long, but I'm getting introduced to other people's theology and how that has an impact on me and how I behave and react in manner. Something you have some type of might go through identity crisis.
Mhm.
And then you're looking at not only have an identity crisis there, but then also you have this way to being an athlete too. And so there's your identity as well. So you're looking at multiple identities clashing and you're just wondering like, how do I survive all this? You know, and how
Yeah,
do you make it
absolutely.
better?
That's such an interesting perspective, I think, like, you bring up too, like, even that transition from moving, because this is my first I'm from Michigan, so my
Hmm.
experience I'm coming to the South, I'm like, "This is very different than what I've grown from at all, and so that being my first and my husband's from North Carolina, so that's I've been in the South more these last couple years than I have in my entire life, but I do think that that's such an interesting point is, like, how does that transition for kids who are going from, this is their culture to now they're moving to the Midwest, and they're like, "What's happening with all these people and their beliefs?" And, like, no one really talks about God up here like that, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just
Hmm.
certain cultural, just norms that they get used to, and then it's so different, and then they're thrown into the thick of, like you said, their sport, and then they're expected to be okay and expected to perform. So I never thought about it that way, but that's a really good point that you bring up.
Yeah. I mean, college is the place where, like you said, most people find themselves or, yeah, they kind of find themselves. They truly are. Or they feel like they're free to express who they really are.
Yeah.
Because, mom and daddy's not always around. And so it's just all those different caveats you put into place. It's like, sheesh, like how do I like, now I'm like, who am I? And then when you're an athlete and you're leaving out as that space. I often wonder like how did that transition for you? Because like you're freshly removed from playing volleyball at the highest level, at one of the highest levels, and then you're like, okay, now I'm transitioning straight to social work, and now I'm going to get my PhD right now. So, I mean, what was that transition like for you to just like, I mean, are you fully let go of being a volleyball player? Let's start from there. Like,
That's a good question because I think that that part of your identity never leaves you. It just changes. It just evolves. And I think
hmm
that what a lot of athletes don't hear is kind of that perspective is like, I think we are kind of conditioned to think that it will never end. You can, and now, especially with women's sports, you can actually pursue professional sports at a high level and get paid decently. So now there's like almost this pipeline or expectation of, okay, you play high level high school and then you go to a great college and you play high level and then you're supposed to go professional. But I am a huge advocate of, okay, even if you do all those amazing and great things, it will end eventually.
hmm
So I think for me, yes, I've come to terms with the fact that my collegiate athletic career is done. However, I'm learning how to still work out like a normal person. Like I'm learning what it means to play volleyball for fun. That has been
hmm
the whole thing that I've had to
Wait, now
navigate.
you telling us that, but are you really out there like competing like a regular person? Like, I'm pretty sure.
I am actually I can say that now. I can go They're probably my last volleyball game, I was like, nobody show me a volleyball for, like, at least 5 months. I needed a break. I needed
Yeah.
to think about it. I needed to be like, I just wanna focus on school. So I think that's a big how that transition for me has kinda surfaced is I have been able to put all that energy that I was putting into volleyball into my schoolwork. So that's kind of how I've transitioned, and the transition's been easier because now, PhD is just D1 school. That's what
Yeah.
it is. Your PhD is just professional school, basically. So I think that it actually made the transition out of sport a little bit easier because I knew I was going to go and continue to pursue academia. However, that's not the case for many, many athletes. And so
hmm
that is a huge thing right now. And in research is people talking about, yeah, athlete transition out of sport is gnarly. It can be really hard. But the good news is that social workers can really help ease that transition because of the just the variety of experience you get and the different perspectives that you get. So I think it's twofold that I can play now in a rec league and I can have a great time. Do I like losing? No, absolutely not. I don't like losing. But is it life or death if I leave and we lost all 4 games? Like, no, it's not, and it never has been. But I think learning to navigate that that conditioning that you've experienced over the last, like for me, was 6 years of elite college sports. So I think that's such a funny question because everyone's gonna answer it differently too about, like, how are you now after you're done being a
hmm
college athlete, so
I mean, like you said, you played the highest level for so long. It's just like some people do have that. Like you have a plan. Like you are being able to transition to, okay, I'm moving, I'm moving, I'm moving. And some people just stop.
mm.
Um, I know some athletes, when I was growing up with either I played ball in high school or I know for them to go to college, it was just like after college, they really just shut down. It was like nothing else. And they were tied to so much in that sport. It took them a little while to make that transition over. And so I just hope that I will check your records at your rec league and you averaging 80 kills a game of matches. So you say you're
No,
taking it easy, but I hope you really
yeah.
are.
Oh, and I will say another thing that I thought of too, to answer your question is that I also don't think athletes are told, and this is even because I even believe that you through this transition, whether you played sports only in high school, whether you play at D3, whether you play NAIA, like you're still going to have to go through this transition at some point.
hmm
And I don't think athletes are told a lot that a lot of the skills, if not all of them, that you learn in sport, the teamwork, the communication, the time management, all of those things translate so well into the workforce but I don't think that that message is communicated. I think that they think a lot of the times like, oh, I've just been spending all this time dribbling a basketball, but I don't think I picked up on any skills. But no, in reality, there are so many things that are going to make them very valuable in the workforce. They just don't always realize it yet. So for me, every job that I've had after sports has been like, well, I feel like I'm exceeding at this thing, but this is just really my standard for how I do everything because this is how I've been taught to do everything. So
Hmm.
I do hope that there's more in the future, just more conversations with athletes around, hey, no, a lot of what you're doing is going to directly translate those leadership skills, those, all the times you wake up and you don't want to go, but you do it anyway. Like those intangible skills are developed a lot, through sports. So,
That's great that you mentioned that because that is a transferable skills that every employer or somebody else is looking for on their team, and not just
mhm.
always from an athletic standpoint when it comes to teams or sports teams. Because there's so many other skills that I mean, you have to be a quick thinker a lot of space. I'm looking at more to like some of the more neural work when it comes to sports and like things of that nature, and like you really have to be, a quick thinker, critical thinker.
Yeah.
I was a soccer player growing up, and I still love the game myself, and so I still have to think 2 or 3 moves ahead because I'm thinking like, okay, if I put the ball here, I'm going to make a run there. Hopefully, I get it there and do my next move. But those are one of the benefits from it. It also helps from the mental standpoint, but it also helps with, like you said, the intangible skills that can go further. A lot of people looking for and love to bring in on their team. And so if they, I believe what you're just saying is that future Dr. Rob, whenever, if we highlight those things and the coaches know that, then maybe they're like, okay, maybe this transition won't be so bad.
Yeah,
There's something
definitely.
a little bit more to me.
You mentioned as a, kind of looking into the neuro aspect of things, and this is something you'll probably find really interesting, but I worked as a while I was finishing up my master's and I was done with volleyball, I worked at, a brain health clinic. It's called Brain Health Hawaii, and they do a lot of, they specialize in, like, personalized TMS or transcranial magnetic stimulation therapy.
Hmm.
And so what we do is we take a brain map. So we put an EEG. It's like this cap that goes on your head and, has all the nodes and things. And it's so interesting when you do the brain map on especially high level athletes, but people who grew up playing sports or anything like that, their brain actually does move quicker. They process information faster and you can see it
Hmm.
in like this map of like the alignment of all the different parts of their brains and how they fire. So I do think that it's really interesting that it is you can prove that yes, the sport is actually helping you to be able to digest information faster. I have had some crazy speed volleyballs coming at my face. Like and it's like, how do you process I made a joke. I said, it's actually nice being able to go just to into a job and not have, physical risk of getting
Hmm.
injured at this job. And so I do. I just wanted to make that note because it is really interesting the like even neuroscience behind how your brain functions after you've been an athlete for so long.
And I think that's the beauty of behind being a social worker and somebody that's interested in sports social work because you just get it. Like you understand, like you mentioned earlier, the important part about social work is that we think about all the components that have an impact on the athlete and not just how to perform. And so when the more shows we have, we have this conversation a lot more like how important the environment is for the athlete in order to perform, whether they're performing to go to practice or performing to go to the game. Like all these things have a major impact on how we show up as our true selves on and off the field because those things matter. Mom and dad got in a fight last night. You stayed up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. You got a game later on that evening. You got to go to school, class, all of that. You don't take a nap in between, or all the
Yeah.
things that you're thinking about that may have caused that argument before during the middle of a play. And so all that stuff is important as we think about it. It's very important for the environment focus to happen when we talk about body support for the athlete. So we can perform all day long. Yeah, that's great. But I mean, when I go back home, I got to deal with all this trauma, all the issues that we're dealing with here. And so, well, thank you for sharing that for sure. I'm gonna go ahead. We're gonna hop into Kobe her corner three. Because we'll sit here and talk all day long. But let me keep it going. And so, Kobe, if you go ahead, take on with your corner three and
Okay.
shoot it to future Dr. Robinson.
Okay. I know it's called Kobe's Corner 3, but I technically have 4 questions, but the fourth one's like,
It's a
well,
foul. You get three and
yeah, it's
one.
just
There
a
you
foul.
go.
So it's just a little free throw. It's just an extra little point. So with the first question, the technical free throw, like, would you ever consider coaching or just, training or anything like that?
Oh,
Since you've played for so long and you have the experience.
Yes, I love coaching. I did a lot of coaching throughout my time as a college athlete. Like even before that, but primarily like I coached a club team one year when I was playing at Michigan State. So like in our off season, I would go to practices and then also go to tournaments and things like that. And then we're forced to run a bunch of camps and
Yes.
stuff. But even though we're forced to run them, I always enjoyed coaching. I love like the middle school age. I love like working with that because they're in that developmental age and they still listen to you, but they have big personalities. Yes, my short answer is yes, and I actually coach a club team now. There are 13s regional team here in Atlanta, and so we play all of our tournaments are around Atlanta. And I think to me, it would kind of be a waste for me not to go share that wisdom that I learned from all my years. So yes, I love coaching and hope to do it, even if it's on the side for a while.
Yeah. Okay. So my first official question. So what are your plans of doing with your research findings?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think that I've learned in my, experience of being a first semester PhD student, is that what I don't want is I don't want to just do a lot of research and then it doesn't amount to anything. Like I don't want to just publish research just to publish. I want it to be able to be practical for people to apply. So I hope that my research can actually be used in college athletic departments and it can be used in high schools and it can be used as tools to be able to just grow the health, the holistic health of athletes. So that's my short answer is that I want it to be useful.
And then my second question. So you've had experience within both, like as an athlete, and then now within the social work field. So what are the barriers that prevent college athletes from like accessing mental health care?
Ooh, that's a good one. And there's a lot of research. That's my first. There's a lot of research that tells us about why, but I will speak more from my personal experience. And it's funny because even as somebody who my concentration was behavioral mental health in my master's, I was never the type of person to even want to go to therapy still. Like I even didn't want to seek out the resources, even though I knew in my head that there were all these good things. And I think one of it was a couple of the experiences that I had had with therapists is they just didn't get me. They just didn't get the life of an athlete. Like I would go into the session and I would have to explain this lifestyle that I was living. And that was hard. It kind of deterred me from wanting to go to therapy. So that was one is I think a lot of athletes either whether they try therapy or whether they don't, they have this fear that you're gonna have to be explaining yourself to this person and it's gonna be less beneficial than it feels like it's worth. And then I think another barrier is purely just accessibility. Like the fact that if I'm an athlete and I'm in my athletic facility all day, every day, but therapy is like, 2 miles down the road, I'm not going. I'm simply
Mhm.
not going because especially if it's out of the way of my apartment, like my schedule is so packed full that it feels hard to fit it in. And I don't think athletes all the time, like I said, they feel that benefit to kind of sacrifice, scale. So I think those are the two main ones. And that was what was really awesome about when I worked at Rainbow Wellness as a practicum student is that they're housed directly in the athletic department. And that was one of the awesome parts is students like they're in the student center for athletes. And so if you're going to study, you got to go see your tutor. Your therapist is also right there. So now you kind of don't have an excuse. So I think that those two things are the biggest ones for me at least.
And then my final question, since I'm an MSW student myself, what advice do you have to give to other MSW students who are interested in working in sport or academia?
That's really good. I would say you don't I would first say that you don't have to have been an athlete yourself to go be a sports social worker. I'll say that because I think that people who are just interested in it and know how important it is, you are absolutely competent and you can do the job. So I'll start that's some advice. And then the second part is just getting involved in sport in any way that you can. Because right now, I know that in a lot of MSW programs, there aren't practicums that, are involved in sport, but whether that's like volunteering at the YMCA basketball games for kids, just so you can be in the environment and you can kind of see what's going on, what the dynamics are, and maybe where you can fit in. And so, or even just watching sports, just really see what's going on, watch interviews, watch how coaches are talking about it. I think just really get immersed in the environment because that's the only way you can really learn kind of what the cultural norms are. Because I think one of the biggest red flags as a student, this is just me, my college athlete talking, is Like if somebody comes in and I can just tell they don't know anything about sports, they don't know anything about the way that how hard we have to train, how much we actually have to do, then it puts us off a little bit, I think, or puts athletes off a little bit. So just really trying to immerse yourself in the environment and just know that you are competent and you are able to do the job because it's just so lacking. Like the social worker perspective is just so lacking in sports. So I would encourage any MSW student, if you even have a little bit of an interest in sport, like go do it because they need you in that space.
Because I've been trying to tell everybody, like in our MSW program or even in the BSW, I'm like, hey, like, MTSU just started sports social work, and I like to call myself the pilot of the program because,
Yeah.
like, technically started it, but it was always an idea at all other universities. But I brought it into some of our advisors. I was like, hey, we should do this, and I try to tell everybody, I'm like, you should do it. Like, I know you played back like in high school or middle school, whatever. So like, you can just bring it to an interest now.
And sports are awesome. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
spend all day like now in like I said in my short time being a PhD student, like I do feel like our job is to be critical of the sports space. And at the same time, I really want to balance the fact that sport is awesome and there's so much good in it. And also, congratulations in doing that because that's amazing. And I hope that people really are going to follow in those footsteps because I do think everybody loves sport. They really do. And so we just need a little help. We need a little help on the
Hmm.
back.
Yes.
So I hope that people are encouraged by you starting that program. And I believe that they will be once they start to, just like me, like I didn't know what like sports social work even was until my friend was just like, hey, check this out.
Mhm.
So I think that the more you do that with people, the more willing they're going to be to even like hop on that program. So again, that's so awesome.
Thank you.
To Dr. Roberts, I want to follow up on the follow up on the question that you answered. You mentioned about people need to be around the sports culture. And even though you're a social worker, you don't need necessarily know everything about sports. But what aspect of sports culture do you believe is important for a social worker to understand in order to be good in this field?
That is a great question. And I honestly think that and so the only experience actually outside of sport that I've had as a social worker is I worked, my general's year practicum was with, the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program, out in Hawaii. So
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of, like, the stuff that it all really translates over. Like, anything that if you were taking a kid who is in an unstable housing situation and you were trying to figure out, okay, what resources do they need and how can I, as a social worker, what is my role in this? I think you just use the same mindset going into sport, knowing that this is still a kid that has come from some environment. It almost is just enhanced. That's what I would use is like it's enhanced because they have a lot of public eyes on them, especially as you get higher up. And so I think maybe just taking into consideration that it's like the same case as you would if you were working with a young kid, but it's more public. And so what are the implications of this now that this kid is not in the background anymore, that now they're getting media attention, that now they have to worry about what people say about their game. That now
Hmm.
they really can't block out the external kind of systems that are impacting them. And so I think maybe, especially if you're working at the higher level. So this is probably not as common of a thing to consider if you're like D3, D2, just simply because the media is not as doesn't
Hmm.
as much. The performance pressures and academic pressures are probably the same or even maybe worse at the D3 level, I would say. And there's been some research around that. But I think as you get to the higher level is like, how do you consider the external influences that are really like impacting this individual? So, but that's like, I think these are all innate things that social workers are already thinking about. So that's also a hard,
Hmm.
because I feel like if you're a social worker, intuitively, you're probably thinking about these things already. So,
Hmm. That's awesome. I just found our connection already. I was actually the state coordinator for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth program in Tennessee. And so
so
I used to
cool.
be known as the homeless guy. Like every time I showed up somewhere, oh, they go to homeless guy. And so I'm like, I'm not homeless, but however, I was that homeless guy. And so, but you're right, like that is something that we do as a social. We think about all the things. And so we literally think about all the things. If you're not thinking of all the things, then you probably need to do some more social working in your life. But that's a very important thing. But you also you mentioned about even though the performance or like the highlighting if you're not D2 or D3. And so we're just thinking about like how the transfer portal and stuff like that's happening nowadays. I would think, I don't know, like I would wonder if the performance significance is like if the performance pressure is not just as high, because now that we're starting to see, at least from the football side and basketball, a lot of these teams are not recruiting high school students anymore. So they'll probably end up starting off D2, D3. And that, knowing that the transfer portal exists, and if I perform well, then the school will pick me up and I might get NIL. And so I wonder, this is the researcher social worker in me right now, like, I wonder what that pressure is like for those students nowadays, being that, knowing that, okay, I'm a big fish in a small pond in high school, like I'm that guy, and then I have to go back down to, it used to be I go to D1 and then like I gotta fight my way on up. Now you're like, okay, more like I'm not going to D1 straight out of high school or get that full ride and then have to start around the mid area. And then if I perform well enough, hopefully I get picked up. Ooh.
Man, and this I still am, and I'm so glad that this is the I'm simultaneously glad and also a little bit discouraged only because I got to be part of pre-NIL, really
Mm-hmm.
pre-transfer portal era, and then I got to also be part of post and all of that. So I have a lot of thoughts around how this era of college sport especially is going to impact especially the mental health of these young
Mm-hmm.
kids. And so I that's such a great point because I think it ultimately what it'll turn into is your JUCOs and your NAIAs and your D2s and D3s are almost like a G League of sorts, if you want.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are gonna go there out of high school, like you said, try to do their best to build up their skills. And then the better that they get, they spend 1 year at a D3, they do well, they transfer up to D2, they transfer out to D1. And so
Mm-hmm.
kids are gonna be even more so less concerned about, the education that they're getting and the wonderful opportunity that it is to be rooted in a program. When I was at Michigan State, we were not very good. We were probably at the bottom mid of the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
And all of our best players, though, this is an awesome thing, like, to think about now is this is pre-transfer portal where everybody was kind of just like getting in the portal and going, but we were rooted there together and I built some of the most lasting relationships that I could have built in college and that made my college experience. Were we winning? Not really, but at the same time, when we all were together, it was just that camaraderie is something that you can't get anywhere else. And so that's what I'm gonna like look back on college sports and kind of be like nostalgic about is like, man, a lot of these college students will no longer be able to get that sense of, community and that sense of home and that sense of pride for your university. Like I'm go green,
Mm-hmm.
go day, even though I still ended up as a grad student, transferring out. But even then, when I got to Hawaii as a grad student, I still got to build that community. So
Mm-hmm.
I just am very hopeful that hopefully, we'll get to a point where people aren't just being motivated by the money, motivated by NIL, but that they are actually choosing their well-being and choosing
Mm-hmm.
community and all those things as social workers we know are so important to your overall health and fulfillment. So
So you say you have a lot of thoughts about NIL, how portals will impact those mental health, so athletes' mental health. I want to hear, like, what are your thoughts? Like, I know, put it out. Let's put it out there. You put it out there, and now I'm asking for it now. I'm not gonna allow you to have a half thought and
yeah,
just tease us a little bit.
yeah, you're not
You
gonna
gotta
let
put it
that
out there now.
like, that's what the point of the podcast is for. Okay, so like I said, I got to experience both sides, and NIL right now is such just like, nobody knows what's going on. Nobody really even knows what's happening, and that is what frustrates me, I think, the most is just the way in which it's unfolding, and almost as though it's actually really funny because we were reading a book in class, and, in the book was 2020, and they're like, "Hey, college athletes should be paid," and I absolutely agree with that. And
Mm-hmm.
now that NIL exists, though, it's not like every athlete is getting paid the same or every athlete is even
Mm-hmm.
still really getting paid. Because so, for instance, like at the University of Hawaii, they don't have a lot of financial resources. So, like, if you aren't the top player on the football team, the volleyball team, and maybe like baseball, you're not getting any NIL. So there'll be one person on a team who has lots of NIL money, lots of NIL resources, and then there's other people on the team who don't have any of that. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
that within itself has its own implications of what does that mean for like those students' mental health that do and even don't get it? Like, I think that there's a lot of
Mhm.
there's more questions than answers
Yeah.
with that. And then I also am just not an advocate of giving 18-year-olds millions of dollars. That's like that's my straight perspective is that I have seen freshman college athletes, and I'm telling you, they do not need that much money at one they just don't. They really don't. And so I think, especially without the financial literacy,
Mhm.
help, all of the things, because I think at the end of the day, like I said, this all ends. It all ends. Like the spotlight will one day be off of you. Nobody's gonna care what you're doing afterwards. And that's the unfortunate truth. Like that a lot of people, you can be the star one day and then next you're almost irrelevant. And so I think that
Mhm.
that is gonna have such an impact on the well-being and the mental health, and we're already seeing it in some ways just with I've been so disheartened too by just some of the stories of just yeah, like just really tragic stories of student athletes,
Mhm.
college athletes. And so I just am such an advocate of I don't think that we are just in the NIL era and we're gonna have to live with it and the transfer portal, but we have to, figure out a more wise way to go
Yeah.
about this because it can't keep going on how it is now because I don't foresee it, getting any better. So yeah, I'm trying to be optimistic and trying to find my place in all of this. And that's
Mhm.
in the research and how to make it practical and all the things. So and I think that, ASWIS, like the Alliance of Social Workers in Sport, is just doing such good work. So I
Mhm.
can't be optimistic and hopeful.
Yeah.
But those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you for sharing that. 'Cause, my thought was that, like, of course, I knew people in college who got a refund check from their student loan and just lost their mind with $2,000, $3,000. $1,000,000? Come on. Like, that, I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't fathom, like, what an athlete's going through with $1,000,000 in their bank account. Like, you have to come to college prepared with a lawyer, attorney, somebody who's great at finance, but you have to have all that set in place. And so it requires you to even grow up even a little bit more than you would imagine as just an athlete to playing.
And then, like,
And then,
with money, people expect things from you. Like, people
oh yeah.
view you different, and a lot of these and this is also the crazy. This is and I'll get off my soapbox, but the crazy part about that is too, kids are coming out of high school never having even played a single snap of their sport, and they're already getting the attention, making the money. Like, what kind of pressure and expectation, one, are they putting on themselves, but two, are the people around them putting on them?
Hmm.
Be this athlete and to live up to those expectations. And so, yeah, that's hard for me to fathom. And just like you were saying, like, yeah, I don't know that responsibility is a lot for anybody, but especially for 18, 19, 20-year olds.
It's going to get to the point where I think it's going to get very contractual after a while. I mean, it's going to be some nasty contracts to the point where it's just like, oh man, I didn't know I was signing a deal with. I better not use that name, with Don King because that's how ironclad it is. You're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And then you think about like it was a quarterback out of UT. He almost had to pay some money back. I don't know what ended up happening, but it got to the point like you didn't play here long enough, so we want our money back. And so how do you recoup that if you already 18 and you just spent half of that, on a Lamborghini or something like that? And then looking at team dynamics too, you mentioned it earlier. Like if I'm in a locker room and I'm a player and I'm just as good as the other player who's getting paid $1,000,000 to play, but I'll get a church's coupon to get a 3-piece chicken. That's all I get. Do I want to stay here for that? Even it's like, okay, how do you build a team dynamic? Like you mentioned that you gain from
Yeah.
being at the two universities that you played at. And so I don't it's gonna I don't know. I want to be optimistic as well. I hate to say I was a clairvoyant. I saw a lot of this stuff happen before, like mentioned. Like, cause those
Mhm.
are things I was thinking in my head is like, okay, how are you gonna control this? Like, everybody's
Yeah.
not gonna get paid. Every sport's not gonna get paid the same.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
because
That's yeah.
football is a money bringer. When you think about, I don't know, what's baseball, man, or a lot of people have rugby clubs out in
Like
sports.
swim and dive. I remember when I was leaving Michigan State, they almost had to cut the swim and dive program because they were like a bunch of different stuff going on with all the finances and the funds. And I'm
Hmm.
like, our football team had just had like they just signed a contract for like a promise of like $1 billion over the next 10 years, like for football, for new facilities, for
Wow.
stadiums. Like and they had to almost cut the swim and dive team. So I do think it does. It changes that dynamic of
Mhm.
all the different joys that is college sport. It really is such an amazing opportunity, such a joy to be part of. But then at the same time, you now have this.
Mhm.
And I wanted to add, Kobe, too, to one of your questions. So my brother actually, it just runs in our family at this point. My brother actually got his MSW as well, and he was at the University of Denver, and they didn't have a sport social work practicum, but he was similar to you, kind of was like, "Hey," brought this to them. I think this would be a good idea. But he is now going on to law school, and I'm like, I think we're gonna need a lot of social work because social work and law, I really do believe have that. You get the policy, and then you also have the diverse, perspective of the actual well being of people. So and now in this age of NIL and all the crazy stuff, it's like,
Mhm.
hey, we need more social workers in law, sports social workers in law too, just as much as we need them in mental health and we need them in administrative roles like as case managers. So I am just seeing like it's almost what you're saying, like the clairvoyancy, but it's more of just like social workers need to be everywhere in.
Mhm. It's funny, there's some programs who actually have, like, a dual social work, JD program. I've seen that happen, which is was very helpful, but, we are needed in this space, and we can't say that enough, and that's why we're definitely on the show. Kobe, have you noticed any, like, experience with? Because I know you work at the academic center with the sports, at MTSU, so have you noticed anything in regards to, like, players' behaviors and attitudes with NIL or, how they're able to, I guess, I won't say cohabitate, but how they work together in these spaces, and has it impacted them at any capacity at all? Like, what's your experience been like with them?
Sometimes it's more like a me ball instead of a team ball. It's like, oh, like so and so's
Mhm,
making this and like they've got all these brand deals, but like what do I have? It's like, well, I mean, I get that. Like they're all freshmen. Drop my pen. They're all freshmen, so like they can't expect like everybody to have like the same thing. But like, I mean, like you got to think about like what are you bringing to the table as well. So I guess
mhm.
that's most of the main thing. Like everybody wants to think about, oh, me, but like, everybody says there's no I in team because there's not, but, like, how are you contributing, like, on the court, on the field? Like, are you? Because we do a lot of sponsors at MTSU. So, like, if you're not contributing
Mhm,
as a team, it's not gonna bring the sponsors in if you're so worried about how you're doing instead of how the team's doing. So that's
mhm.
pretty much it.
Ooh, male and mental health. I could see it, or transporting mental health. I can only imagine what that is. We'll see about 4 or 5 years from now what's going to end up happening. Like,
Yeah.
you gonna start doing studies, and pre and post, you start realizing, like, man, this really has an impact on the well being. Like, we know that, but like, okay, now we got to put the research out there and show it, like, hey, this will have a major impact on your athletes. And I think that's where we step in as for social workers, and do that portion as well. We could be here all night. I might ask you one more question, future Dr. Robinson. It looks like you had a podcast or a show called Sacred Sports Souls. And so, can you tell us more about that and what's that all about?
Yeah, so that podcast was it was an awesome time doing it. I had never thought about a podcast. I just liked listening to them. Like that was a
Mm-hmm.
big part. But my husband really encouraged me when I came to him one day with the idea of like, hey, like, I kind of want to start talking to athletes about, just their faith and how that has impacted their journey through sports. And so that's also kind of going back to earlier on when you asked about the spirituality and faith and religion. That was also where that stemmed from, was like after
Mm-hmm.
hearing so on that podcast, I would interview various athletes. Most of them were my friends. Most of them were just, people that I had access to. But it was, yeah, me interviewing about their journey and then just how their faith really played a role in that. And what I continuously saw over and over and over again is that every athlete's journey had a down, had a low point,
Mm-hmm.
and their faith is what seemed to have kept them going and to have given them a hope and just allow them to continue. And because a lot of those people that I got to interview are now professionals, they went on to play professional sports and they're kind of at the peaks of their athletic career now. And so it was just interesting to have those conversations and how every journey was so unique, but also followed a similar pattern. Like I said, inevitably, most athletes are going to get hurt along their career, and then everybody's career
Mm-hmm.
ends at some point. So it's like, how do we process and how do we deal with those low points in our career? Yeah, how do we become better people, better teammates, better just all around for it? So it was an awesome time doing it. I have a little less time on my hands now. 'Cause
Of course.
the PhD program, but I do hope to take some of that. And you alluded to it briefly, but I also had some awesome opportunities getting to do some sideline analyst stuff when I was at. So I think I'm thinking very briefly that I want to end up doing something in sport media because I also have seen a lot of the impacts that sport media has on people's perceptions
Mhm.
of athletes, and I think it's really really important to have a voice that is speaking on one the real, but then also the kind of implications of how things are moving and how media represents athletes too. So I love doing it, and I love doing podcasts like this too, just when you sent out that email, I was like, "I don't know what I can contribute, but I'm gonna say that I'll do it." So I just love having conversations like this 'cause I think that they're so important. So I love that you
Yeah.
guys are doing this, and I love just that, and I hope when people watch that they can feel encouraged, by the work that's being done, but then also just the work that's gonna be done in the future,
Mhm.
that is sports social work. So
Well, I'm encouraged. So you got one out of me, and I'm part of Kobe as well.
Yes.
But man, what you shared is so powerful. It's always important to hear, like the athlete's voice is important. I believe in social work, the people that we work for, the people we support, the people we're uplifting, we have to have their voice because we don't know what to do without them.
Mhm.
Like I think the worst thing any social worker can do is try to create a solution without having the voice of the people first, because
Mhm.
then you're just making up something. That's how I
Yeah.
believe. You think you know what's right, but you really don't. You don't have a clue, and maybe you do because you have a lived in experience. But you can't always go off just your own lived experience because everybody has a different story to tell. So, thank you for sharing your story for sure because it's definitely important as we look to expand the work of sports social work, get more people involved, whether you're athlete or non-athlete, or even if you're a social worker right now, I'm just like, I'm not where I am, but man, sports social work seems like where it needs to be, where I want to be. And so thank you for putting that call out there. And hopefully we can get even more social workers who are in the field or even more athletes who want to go into the field as well. We're going to get ready to wrap up. I got the most important question I can ask for everybody that comes to this show. And the show itself is called "And Then We Win." And so we want to know from your perspective before we think about winning, before we put on a jersey or anything like that. Like, what is the most important thing that is important for the athlete or anybody else dealing with sports to really focus on before we talk about winning?
First off, that's a great concept. That's such a great concept because it is so just like we were talking about in this NIL transfer portal era, it's like everything is being done so that programs can win. And I just think
Hmm.
that we've lost the point. We've lost the plot of what sport was really created and meant to be. Whew, I would say that okay, my first point is that you're gonna lose. How rare is it that a team goes undefeated in a season? How rare is that? That's so rare. And so I think maybe instead of focusing so much on the win, it should be more about the process that is just where you are. Like for instance, if you're an athlete, what is your process? What does your process look like every day? Yes, you can have the outcome goal of wanting to win, but like what is your process and how is that affecting your well-being? I think that that is something that athletes don't consider a lot. They'll do everything at the expense of like to win, but they don't stop and consider how is this affecting my well-being. And then I think for coaches, almost very similarly, it's like, yes, winning can be the goal, but what is your process and how can you do that in a way that empowers athletes, that encourages athletes, that grows athletes,
Hmm.
as opposed to athletes as a product. So I think we just, as people, need to slow down a little bit, think less about the outcome and more about the process.
I love that. Love that. Well, thank you, future Dr. Robinson, for sharing your time this evening. If you ever need anything, you just one email away from, me and me or Kobe. We're glad to help you support any efforts whatsoever. Man, this has been great. I enjoyed our conversation and we would love to have you back, somewhere down the line, hopefully,
5 years from now, after after all this all plays out, I'll be back. No, see,
oh, you'll be in school forever. So like we got time. Like we got time to schedule and so but for sure, like even if you need some ideas to bounce off with your research and whatnot, please feel free to email me and we'll definitely make it happen. So thank you for joining the show. And man, You enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
So thank you so much. And thank you both again. I enjoyed this so much.
And thank you for tuning in to And Then We Win. My name is Dr. Justin Singleton, and I'm a sports social worker. I love what I do. And if you're interested in learning how I can best support your athlete, your parent group, or even the team, please feel free to reach out to me at info@justsinglevision.com. That is info@justsinglevision.com. Feel free to contact me for a free 30-minute consultation so we can figure out how we can best support the mind, vision, and action of your athletes. Thank you and take care.